To stop the Ukrainian counterattack, Russia must use nuclear weapons. These are the words of Dmitry Rogozhin, a former Director General of Russia's Roscosmos space agency and Deputy Prime Minister in charge of the defense industry. There is no other way, according to Rogozhin, for Russia to defeat the Ukrainian offensive. In a 30-second clip posted to Twitter, Rogozhin states that according to Russian doctrine, the nation is fully within its rights to use tactical nuclear weapons, pointing out that preventing such strategic reversals as is expected of the counterattack is, quote, why they exist. This is technically true. Tactical nuclear weapons were originally developed to cause large-scale battlefield losses, or to deny ground to an enemy by irradiating it. In a twisted Cold War logic kind of way, tactical nukes were an attempt to avoid all-out nuclear exchanges, because if either NATO or the Soviet bloc found itself facing a strategic defeat on the battlefield, the only real recourse would be to use strategic nuclear weapons. These weapons have significantly more destructive power than a small tactical nuke, though officially there is no real limit to the yield of a tactical nuclear weapon. Thus, in the minds of Cold War planners, if both sides could lob smaller nukes at each other, they would avoid lobbing the big nukes at each other's cities. In a twisted sense, there is some logic, assuming that the side who just had their forces nuked was perfectly content to leave it at that, and there is serious doubt there. Rogozhin goes on to make the case for Russia's use of tactical nuclear weapons. Simply put, Ukrainians have the battlefield advantage with better tech and training compared to the Russians. According to Rogozhin, quote, they're a great leveler for the moment where there's a clear disparity in conventional forces and hardware in the enemy's favor. And again, he isn't wrong. Ukraine has the most advantages as it prepares for the coming offensive, which may have launched by the time you see this video. It has spirited away an estimated 8 to 10 brigades to be trained by NATO personnel over the last few months, putting significant strain on its forces stuck in defensive positions who have had to fight on without relief. But it was all a gamble to fully prepare troops fielding high-quality NATO kit who will soon be the spear thrust into the soft underbelly of the Russian military. For its part, the Russian military is in dire straits. Its morale crisis is ongoing, especially in light of the failure of the winter offensive that wasn't really an offensive. The meat grinder of Bakhmut has scored as much as 100,000 casualties on Russia's side, with an estimated one-third as many for Ukraine, making it a clear win. And on the eve of success in Bakhmut, the Russian military and Wagner fell into infighting as they both attempted to sabotage each other and claim the glory of at last capturing a completely strategically worthless town. Equipment shortages have been severe as well, with Russia's 20-to-1 artillery overmatch dropping to as little as 6 to 8 to 1 during the winter. Now both sides are facing a serious shell crisis, but Ukraine has the backing of most of the world, while Russia has only a few friends to call on, including Belarus, South Africa, and North Korea. Even China, who many predicted would throw its lot in behind Russia, has been hesitant to directly support Putin, and at best China has funneled small amounts of aid via its commercial sector. Russia's supply of precision weapons has been at dangerously low levels since last fall, forcing it to import weapons such as the Iranian-made Shahed suicide drone. Facing the most severe sanctions in history, Russia's arms industry has struggled to produce more than a handful of cruise and ballistic missiles a month. In typical Russian fashion, though, instead of saving up weapons for a single overwhelming attack, Russia's military and political leadership have been so desperate for a victory of any sort that they've attacked Ukraine immediately upon receiving each new batch of weapons. This has led to a skyrocketing rate of intercepts by Ukrainian air defenses, which now hovers between 80 and 90%. Further, the decision to target Ukraine's sprawling civilian infrastructure not only failed to shut down the national electricity grid, but failed at even keeping affected sections down for very long. The weapons used to try to destroy civilian targets could have been better used attacking military ones. Tactical disasters such as the Battle of Volodar have further compromised the Russian military. In the largest tank battle of the war so far, Russia lost about 120 armored vehicles from an already diminishing stockpile. And it wasn't just armored vehicles lost in an attempt to capture Volodar, as Russia had also broken up veteran, highly proficient units to reinforce the units largely made up of green conscripts and gotten a lot of them killed in the process. Yevgeny Prigozhin has himself stated that the Russian military is in a state of crisis. In a 17-minute-long daily sitrep, Prigozhin stated on May 13th that the new Russian conscripts and recruits were not receiving adequate training and instead were being rushed to the front lines. Once there, they were not being properly supported with artillery and reconnaissance drones. Naturally, Prigozhin touted the superiority of his own Wagner troops as he rallied against the Russian Ministry of Defense and the Russian military alike. Yet, on the ground, Ukrainian forces claimed that it was Wagner units who broke and ran first in counterattacks around the Bakhmut flanks. By comparison, Ukrainian troops are receiving ever-increasing numbers of Western tanks, with new Leopard 1s and Leopard 2s being pledged to Ukraine. By the end of the summer, Ukraine should also have the American Abrams tank, albeit without its modern classified armor package. The Abrams, however, is still a monster of a tank, and far better than anything Russia is putting out on the field anytime soon. The UK also has recently pledged Storm Shadow long-range missiles, enabling Ukraine to finally strike with precision at targets deep behind enemy lines, the exact capability they've been begging the US for with the ATACMS that it's refused to send. With the sheer amount of firepower massing up against Russian troops, it's easy to see why some are starting to call for the use of tactical nuclear weapons. It could work, but what would be the consequences? First off, would tactical nukes even work against a Ukrainian counteroffensive? That depends on the numbers used. Armies don't operate in massive clumped formations like in Napoleonic times, and instead, in order to avoid enemy reconnaissance or bombardment, spread out over large swaths of territory. The real trick, which Russia has been unable to master, is to be able to rapidly reconstitute your forces to create penetrating fists of men and armor that punch through weak points before dispersing once more into the enemy rear. And this is exactly what Ukraine has been learning to do from its NATO teachers in the last 6 months. This means that Ukrainian forces simply aren't vulnerable to tactical nuclear weapons, and lobbing one at a massive Ukrainian armor may at best score a dozen vehicles destroyed and a dozen more disabled. Western tanks like the Abrams were designed to operate in a nuclear environment, and while details are highly classified, many estimates state that the tank itself would survive a 15-kiloton blast 500 meters away. The crew would need a bit more distance than that to survive the shockwave effect, though the tank itself would be sufficient to protect from most of the radiation effects. When you've got an offensive front spread out across several hundred kilometers, suddenly you need more than one tactical nuke to have a real battlefield impact, and you also have to remember that your own forces are going to be subject to the effect of the nuke. One Defense Department source estimated that for Russia to have a significant impact on the war, it would need to use nearly 100 tactical nuclear weapons spread out across the entire front. Anything less than that, and Ukraine's forces are simply too widely dispersed to be affected. Just in the Battle of Volodar alone, more Russian tanks were destroyed than a single tactical weapon could potentially destroy. The real value may be in using tactical nuclear weapons as a show of force and to deny ground to the Ukrainians. However, this would require Russia to detonate multiple nuclear weapons at ground level, causing massive radiation plumes. In normal airburst configuration, nuclear weapons blow most of their radiation upward and into space, and create very little fallout. Contrary to popular opinion, ground zero of an airburst detonation would be accessible without protective gear within days of detonation. But in a ground burst configuration, nuclear weapons create a lot of nuclear fallout, and this fallout would be exactly what Russia would want to show off. During the Cold War, the UK had a similar idea and even toyed with the idea of deploying nuclear landmines in West Germany, if only briefly. These nuclear weapons would cause massive irradiation of the countryside, denying access to the enemy, who would be forced to seek an alternate route that could be more easily defended. Eventually, the UK got nervous about East Germany's reactions to discovering their absolutely insane plan to irradiate half their country in order to defend it, and canceled its nuclear landmine program. Fun side fact, because during winter there was concern that the mine's components would freeze, the British designed the mine so that a live chicken could be stored inside it, with enough food and water for a week. The chicken's body heat would keep the landmine operational until it died, at which point, we're guessing if Armageddon hadn't kicked off, the British would simply dig up the mine and replace the dead chicken. Russia could use tactical nuclear weapons to create large swaths of irradiated territory and deny it to the Ukrainians. However, once more, Russia would need to use dozens of weapons to achieve the desired effect. And then there's the problem of the fallout. Russia, as most people with a map know, borders Ukraine. The prevailing winds over Europe flow west to east, earning them the nickname of the Westerlies. That means that the fallout from nuclear detonations in Ukraine isn't going to remain in Ukraine very long, and instead will end up irradiating huge swaths of Russian territory. With winds right now also blowing south, it'll move a lot of fallout high up in the stratosphere into Turkey and Africa or the Middle East beyond it. If Russia is a pariah state now, wait until it's responsible for irradiating large parts of Eastern Europe, Northern Africa, and the Middle East. Then there's the political consequences of using nuclear weapons. First, the US has warned that there would be catastrophic consequences if Russia used nuclear weapons in Ukraine. President Biden sent a delegation to speak with the Russian ambassador to lay out the exact consequences in private, though the public remains in the dark. It has been postulated that the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine by Russia would prompt an immediate conventional military response by the US against Russian troops in Ukraine and/or an attack on the Black Sea Fleet itself to impose a crippling punishment on Russia. At this point, Russia has few delusions about its ability to defend its troops in Ukraine or its Black Sea Fleet from a US military attack. The US isn't the only nation Russia has to fear, though, as the use of nuclear weapons would force China to pull any remaining support. With China's no first-use policy on its own nuclear stockpile, Russia's offensive use of a nuclear weapon would earn it immediate condemnation. To not condemn Russia's use of nukes would risk turning China into a fellow pariah state precisely when it's trying to prove to the world that it's a major political power by brokering a peace deal between the two warring sides. With its own desire to invade and annex Taiwan, China's already finding itself put in a very uncomfortable position by Putin's unexpected and disastrous invasion. But without nuclear weapons, there's likely a lot of truth to Dmitry Rogozhin's assessment that Russia cannot beat the pending Ukrainian offensive. And even if the Ukrainian offensive only has modest gains, is a failure, or is an outright catastrophe, both sides have more than enough manpower to keep the war going for a very long time indeed. Unlike Russia, though, Ukraine has the ongoing support of a global coalition that seems to expand every day with new members willing to give arms to Ukraine. Russia's only real remaining advantage is its vast manpower pool, but there are already signs of dissent within the Russian population, and a full mobilization or significant number of additional casualties may end up breaking the Russian war effort before Ukraine can inflict a military defeat. Now go watch How Would the US Respond if Putin Attacked First, or click this other video instead, before Vlad nukes it.